All right. Namaste, everyone. My name is Shashi Kusuma. I welcome you all on behalf of Dharmansh USA. Some of you know Dharmansh USA, some of you may not have ever heard of it. But Dharmansh USA is a nonprofit 501c3 registered in the United States in Atlanta, Georgia. We are about a year and a half to 2 years old. It's a very, very young organization. We're essentially a generic corpus Hindu fund that works in the United States and also in India, in Bharath. And we generally do civilizationally, generationally impactful projects that are closely vetted and properly accounted for and followed through to completion. Some of these projects include things like Veer Mata program in Bengal, where we're trying to do nutritional assistance for young mothers, expecting mothers, so that their children are born healthy. There's a project in Kerala we're doing where we do reverse osmosis projects that we deliver clean drinking water because of contamination there to the entire village. We have completed a project for tube wells in Sandesh Khali in Bengal. We have done a lot of dilapidated temple reconstructions in, impoverished areas so that the community can have a sense of community and they can get together and, have some spiritual life as they build their community back together. We also provide sustenance or effort or aid to many families to give them job training so that they can provide for their families. We also do some Gaumata Raksha programs where we kind of try to rescue and take care of some on a temporary basis until they find a permanent home. So all of these projects that we do are very impactful. They're long term, and one main criteria is that they have to become self-sustaining over time. We don't have a plan to sustain them long term, but they have to become self-sustaining over a period of time. So these are closely vetted. Another aspect of the Dharmansh USA work is education, clearly. So one project that we've already started that's going very, very well is publishing children's books for the United States and really globally. And the reason for that is because a lot of Hindu literature is very poor, it's misrepresented, it's not widely available. And so this project aims to tackle that problem. So now this is the same yajna to improve education for the Hindu population and really the whole population at large is to do projects like the one that we're about to embark on with Bharath Rao, also known as Yajnadevam moniker on online. So this is a really, really important project for us at Dharmansh because we see a civilizational, generational impact of this project. Just a quick background there. The Indus script, many people may not even heard of it. Many people may not know the relevance of it. Many people may kind of wonder why does that matter and why is Dharmansh doing it. The reason is because Indus script fits in the gap between 3000 1500 BC era where there's a lot of confusion of history, and once this decryption happens, which Yajnadevam or Bharath Rao is going to share with us today, it solves a big puzzle and establishes the continuity of the entire Hindu and Indian or Bharatiya civilization from millions of for thousands of years to today. And that's why that's important because it can have a profound effect on changing the narrative in schools and colleges and academia at large. So that's why this project is so relevant for us. And one other reason is because, history is so important for us to learn. For the longest time, Indians have been not taught anything. If they're taught something, it's incorrect or inaccurate. It's been misrepresented. There's been a lot of lies told and propaganda propelled across the world about the Hindu civilization. There's a lot of Hindu hatred that's happening across the world. So this is our humble attempt to bring forth truth and facts to establish the continuity and get this accepted as mainstream across all conversations about the Hindu history. So that's our attempt to build confidence, especially in the youth, to know that they come from a great heritage. They come from a great civilization with a fantastic history that has produced marvelous human beings that have done amazing, amazing work that still blows my mind every day I think about it. And I myself have not known any of this until 3 years ago. So we are passing on this knowledge for the younger generation, which is really the thrust of this. And so, without much ado, I want to introduce the other members on this webinar. The first one I want to introduce is Nishant Limbachia. He's a board member of Dharmansh USA. He's going to be running the Q&A session towards the end. So a few homekeeping things. So if you have any questions, please do write them down in the chat box or the Q&A box. We'll be monitoring throughout the webinar so that we can have a very robust conversation after the initial introduction talk that Bharath Rao is going to give us. Please try to minimize chat during the presentation so that you can hear and listen to the presentation, which is so enlightening for all of us. And then if anybody wants to say something, please do raise your hand. If we do have time at the end, we'll try to see if we can have anybody talk about anything if they're interested in. But in the meantime, please do write up the questions in the chat box. Having said that, I want to introduce Mr. Bharath Rao and have him introduce himself and start the presentation.
Hello. Am I on?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, Dharmansh, thank you for the opportunity for arranging this and reaching it to an audience that is interested in this topic. I thought it was a very esoteric topic, but looks like there is substantial interest in both academia and the ordinary people, and I'm very happy about it. And thanks to people who like Dharmansh who give me this platform to spread awareness about this project. So I don't know. So my understanding is that the audience is mixed. There are some people who know about Indus Valley, many people who don't. So I'll just go over the history of Indus Valley, and then we will talk about the script and how it's deciphered and what are the things in the in the contents. So my paper is at this link. You can just search for my ID. You will find it. It's a very good search engine optimized name. So you will find me on Twitter, on YouTube, and academia. So let's start with the Indus civilization. What exactly is the Indus civilization? Roughly, it's one of the oldest and one of the largest ancient civilizations. So when we look at the first settlement, it is around 77,500 BC, around 9,500 years ago. Sorry, 9,050 years ago. There were the first oldest settlements, one in Birana, which is close to Haryana, and the other is in Mehgad, which is in what is today Pakistan. It's in near Quetta. And eventually we start seeing more settlements. Rakhigadi is, it's a very big settlement, and we have started excavating there and finding a lot of artifacts. So you will see the settlements increase slowly over time and spread across the whole Indus River system, Indus and Saraswati River systems. And eventually around 4000 BC, you start seeing the first writing. You also see the first seals. Okay, so a seal is a very specific artifact that is designed to create impressions that another person recognizes. So it is not art, that's something you have created on rock or something for your own consumption. It is specifically created to supply or to exchange information or identity or something like that. So the first seal starts in 4000 BCE. The seal we have doesn't have any writing on it, but there's writing in a place called Balakot. We have some pottery shards which have writing. I'll show that in a minute. So around 4000 BCE, something happened. There's writing, there is seals, there is common identity, and so on. And we don't see any more, we don't see a lot more. We see occasionally, we see graffiti in in what's called the Ravi phase in some of the sites. And then there's something called the mature phase where we suddenly start seeing a lot of these. And this is between 2800 and 1900 BC. Okay. And these are in the big cities of Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, and so on. So around 1900 BC, the volume of artifacts drops precipitously. So it's just, we can't find them anymore. Okay, we find occasionally one here and there, but most of them are, they stop showing up in the archaeological record. The symbols on the, which were on the seals, they continue to show up on Janapada coins. So Janapada is a republic, early republics you may have heard of, things like Vaishali and Kuru Janapada and all of those. So those were early republics. And their coins start, they show the same symbols as the Indus symbols. And it continues like that into even, I think, 100 CE Vaishali, in some of the clay tokens you see Indus inscriptions. You start seeing mixed Indus Brahmi inscriptions from around 680 BCE. And most of these are in Tamil Nadu. There's a place called Kiradi or Kiradi. And there you start seeing, the recent excavations have found both Indus inscriptions, Brahmi, and in some layers there are both. Okay. So if you look at the spread of the Indus civilization, you can see that most of the sites are along the what is now the dried Saraswati bed. So if you see that bluish line on the right side, that is the path of the Saraswati River. And the little black dots are sites along the river. You can see that on the top right, you can see the Kunal, which is where some of the earliest seals were. You can also see many other sites of Haryana, the important sites. You see Rakhigarhi, all the red sites are important cities. Okay. In the west, you see Harappa and Mohenjo-daro also on the important rivers. Okay. And there are many other sites. In Gujarat, you see sites, and in Pakistan, and what is today Pakistan, you see lots of sites. So if you look at the sites through time, what you see is that when the mature phase started, there are sites in pretty much spread everywhere uniformly. There are a lot of sites in today's Pakistan. There's many sites in Gujarat, in Haryana, Punjab. There are a lot of sites. But something happens around 1900 to 1600 BC. What happens is the sites in the west, they are mostly abandoned and people have moved on. They have moved, if you can see, the number of sites in Haryana increase a lot. If you see that second map, second small inset map. So what has happened is the people have migrated and they have abandoned their old cities. If you go up further in the next 300 years or so, you will see even the Gujarat sites are thinning out. And just around 3,300 years before present, you only have the Haryana sites. So this is a pattern of essentially the what is called the decline of the Indus Valley civilization. Okay.
Bharatji, can I pause you for a second here?
Yes.
Some people are asking to do a presentation mode so they can see the full slide. So if you can do that, it'd be great.
I don't know if this will work. What do you see? You see the full thing?
Yes, it works. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, sometimes it doesn't work, so I'm cautious. Okay. Right. So what happens after the so-called decline around 700 BCE, you still have sites in Haryana. But eventually you start getting what's called the Janapadas. And the Janapadas are, you start all your Panchala and all of these Janapadas start around that time. So it is as if they have transitioned from the Indus Valley to the Janapada system. But notice that even till 700 BCE, there are still many, many sites in Haryana, just a lot of them. Okay. So what is the reason for the decline? So we believe, or there's been some recent research that suggests the 4.2 kilo year event, which is essentially a climatic event that hold on, something happened to my screen. Do you see my screen or no?
Yes, we see.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, it's something happened to it. Okay. So let's go ahead. So there's something called a 4.2 kilo year event, which was about 2200 BC, maybe a little before that, where there was a global cooling and drought. So the rivers froze. Many people died. Like in the northern Eurasia, it was pretty harsh. And this event is suspected to have eventually created the Bronze Age collapse of other civilizations in the Mediterranean. And in the Indus civilization, what happened was there was essentially a very long drought, about 250 years, with a couple of short, relief spells. So what happens when there is a drought? Your rivers runs dry. For a while, you get water through wells because the rivers also flow underground. You'll get some water, but it is very, very hard to survive in a place where there's no rain for like 60, 90, 100 years. It's just the land cannot support it. So that is the reason people started migrating to the Himalayas, near Haryana, in that foothills of the Himalayas, where there's enough rain and from glacier-fed rivers there was enough water. Okay, so that is the reason they moved, and that is the reason for decline. So it was very slow and deliberate, and people just started thinning out and just leaving the sites on the rivers. It was just no longer economically viable. You couldn't farm. See, it's one thing to live in the city, but someone has to farm outside the city to feed you. So if there's no rain, they cannot farm, and you didn't have the logistics of modern day where food can come to you on an airplane. They didn't have it that day in those days. So eventually people just moved out. That's basically what happened. My screen is not moving. It says your screen sharing is paused. Resume. Okay. Okay, you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes. So you see the slide saying migrations?
Yes.
Okay. So what happened, what this map shows is the different populations and their migrations along the country. So you have to, keep in mind that Indus Valley was actually a very cosmopolitan population. So when they tested the strontium ratios of the teeth in the Indus Valley skeletons and the Indus peripheral skeletons, they found that most of the people, around 80% of the people, were migrant from other parts of India. Okay, so it was not a local, it was not a isolated city that was only doing its own little economy or its own little system. The whole civilization was integrated, and people were migrating based on their jobs or whatever the business. So we know that it was cosmopolitan, and when they had to uh, exit, or when they had to migrate out, they migrated out along the routes where they possibly where they came from, or where they have business contacts or whatever. And you see, these are the arrows show how they moved. Eventually, people started settling in the south, and in the south, there's something called a Southern Neolithic. There was another Neolithic culture in the south that where the Indus people moved in there, and they formed what would eventually become the the Dravidian cultures. So when people present the Indus Valley, they kind of present it as something that happened in the past, some mysterious civilization that is gone and disappeared, doesn't exist anymore. There's like a hard reset, someone wiped the slate clean and they created a new civilization later in 600 BC or something like this, or 1200 BC, depending on your viewpoint. But if you look at the artifacts of the Indus Valley, and if you look at the artifacts everywhere across the country, you see nothing but continuity. Okay, so this on the left is that famous dancing girl figurine. It's actually very small. I've seen it in Delhi Museum. And you see the bangles they're wearing is very similar to the bangles that are worn by Rajasthani women even today. Okay, so it's one example of a continuing culture. This is on the left is a jewelry that is on an Indus figurine. So this Indus figurine is painted. You can see the hair is painted black. You can see there's red color painted in her parting of her hair. You can see the jewelry is like it's got this horizontal layers and it has little gems hanging on the edges of it. This is the style of jewelry that's worn even today. Okay, and it's not very clear, but that figurine also has a little bindi or little dot in her forehead. So it is essentially the fashion continues to this day. Okay. On the right is the famous priest king. He's wearing a little diadem, which is a not a crown, but it's a little strip of possibly some metal, and he has a little circle in the center. This tradition also continues in different parts of the country today. And these are all, by the way, different parts of the country have different elements of Indus culture, right? So it is spread all over, right? So it's not just in Rajasthan or not just in, it's everywhere. One of the famous depictions is this depiction of a figure doing yoga. And this particular asana, this particular posture is called Mula Bandhasana. And Mula Bandhasana is one of the hardest asanas. It's harder than, headstand. It's harder than pretty much anything, because it takes really decades of practice to get it right, to do it comfortably and sit in that in meditation. And that is why it's depicted. It is specifically that pose is depicted. So yoga as a cultural continuity starts from the Indus Valley times and continues till today. On the right, it's very faint, but the person is wearing what we call upavita, or it's called jenu today in modern Hindi. It used to be a thick rope-like thing that was worn from the left shoulder down to the right waist, and you can kind of see it here. So this is the art of the Indus Valley, the kind of depictions that continue today. And on the right is the same thing in Lepakshi temple. So on the left, you see a figure, you see an animal with three heads, and the three heads are looking in three directions. So one is looking into the past, which is behind, the other is looking into the future, and the third one is looking down to the present. Okay, so the same thing has been depicted in Lepakshi temple, but since the bull cannot turn like the goat, it's at lower elevation. So this concept represents Trikaladarshi, which means one who can see into the past, present, and future. It's essentially a symbolism of Shiva. This is, there's a set of these yoga figurines performing different asanas, and this particular one is called Rashasana. I selected this because I could find a human equivalent of the same pose. There are other poses also. Many of you, if you're joining from India or if you have been to India with your parents, you may have seen this in your grandmother's house, one of these. These are actually from Indus Valley. And the design of these are pretty much identical even to this day. These carts on the, you can see on the right what we call bullock carts. These are slowly going out of fashion, but they are a continuing tradition from Indus Valley. And the word wagon is related to the Sanskrit word vahan. And vaha actually means shoulder, something, especially a shoulder of an oxen. That's something that pulls. So the word, the wagon itself is related to this kind of bull which can be yoked at your shoulder. So I'll just briefly show you what the script looks like, and then we'll go into detail on the decipherment in a minute. So essentially, this is what the script looks like. This is what the seals look like. So I have different kinds of artifacts here. On the left, we have an actual square seal. These are about 3.5 to 4.5 centimeters square. I mean, it's 3.5 into 3.5, the length and breadth. And sometimes there's a figure, there's an icon of animal. And in front of the animal, there is what's called the cult object. And above that are certain what looks like writing, like a pictorial writing. On the right, you have the long writing without any animal icon, and these are, you will see that when there were animal seals in the earlier seals, the letters were not planned, but when these long seals start, they're planned. It's very hard to do this with this perfect layout and perfect font size and all of this without planning the seals. So as time passed, they improved their orthography. In the center, you can see a swastika seal that is essentially a kind of swastika. There are many different kinds of swastikas, which shows development of the concept. See, if you find one sample and only one kind of sample, that doesn't have a lot of meaning. It could be a traveler or it could be something they imported. But when you see the same symbol being displayed or being created in different formats and on different materials, then that is development, and that symbol becomes a symbol of the culture. So as an example, if you find one flag of of the US somewhere, that just may mean someone visited there. But if you go to the US, you will find the flag on various different objects, even on the automobiles, on many different kinds of surfaces and many different styles. So that shows that that symbol had deep meaning and cultural relevance to the people. Okay. And on the right, you see writing on a potsherd. Now, what is special about this is that the writing is what's called post-firing writing. This means that the literacy was a general literacy, and it was not a special class of people. If it's pre-fired, then that means the person who made the pottery is the one who wrote it. So there's like a particular group of people who can do it. So here what has happened is somebody had a pot and it broke and he wrote it on the potsherd. So that shows a literate society. It doesn't mean everybody was literate, but it means the literacy was general. Like there were many people who were literate. It could still be 1% or less, but it's not only a special class of scribes that are literate. Now the Indus script, although we call it the Indus script, it is actually widespread across many different regions. We continue to see Indus-like graffiti on burial pots in megalithic cultures. So this particular examples at the left is from Sanur. It's from the year 50. It's like 50 CE, like, it's in the Common Era. So they were using it into the Common Era. And of course, in Kiradi, you have these, we found these Indus symbols. We also have them in Chandraketugad in 300 BC and so on. So you have really, it is across a lot of breadth and a huge temporal variation. So this particular samples here are from, this is a very old sample from Iran, actually Western Iran. and these have Indus symbols. The Bet Dwarka is much more recent. It's estimated to be between 1000 and 1300 BCE. The Indus seal technology was so successful for whatever commerce they did that it started getting exported. And here we see in South Central Asia, which is Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, all that area, you start seeing Indus seals and Indus symbols, and including a complete seal with the elephant, which is Indus, which is an Indian symbol. There's no elephants outside in South Central Asia. So they adopted this technology, and maybe they had trade relations, and essentially the culture was being exported to that region. These examples are from Mesopotamia. So in what is today Bahrain and Mesopotamia, and some of these old cities, Susa and so on, they started finding Indus seals, and some of them had symbols that are in the similar sequence to Indus symbols, but many they were in completely unrelated sequences. So the seal technology was exported to Mesopotamia. Initially, they wrote a few with Indus language, and then they adapted that script to write in their own language. So there's a researcher named Rajesh Rao who has shown mathematically that these are in a different language. Now, if you look at the inscriptions themselves, we saw the seal earlier. They are not just on a seal. The seals are made of steatite, which is like a soapstone. It's very soft. You can carve it very nicely. And it's kind of bleached with alkali to make it white. And then it is baked. And when it bakes, it becomes very hard. So it becomes very durable. And that is why we have these seals which have lasted, between 4,000 and 5,000 years. And you can see in some of the seals, the detail is exquisite. So it is not something that is commodity. It is something special that they have done with great time and attention, and they have preserved it for a long time. It must have been carried on for decades, for generations, and at a certain time it got obsolete, so they would discard it. The writing is also on. So that is a seal. That is essentially it's meant for creating impressions, but you also see seals on what are called they're inscribed tablets. So essentially, it's just been scratched. It's not carved from a rock. It's been scratched on a little stone tablet. And on top, you see what's called a narrative tablet. It's in bas relief, which means the items are slightly raised. They are not at the so essentially material has been taken away to give them a 3D look of the figurine. So in a seal, it's depressed inside, like it's carved out. In a bas relief, the remainder is carved away so that the figures are standing up. And one of the observations is that these surfaces are more worn, the raised surfaces are more worn than the lower surfaces. So if the wear is from climate or corrosion, that wear would be uniform, but because the upper surfaces are worn out, it is guessed, or it is kind of conjectured, that these were probably used as currency. Like when someone pushes it over a table, every time it gets worn out a little. So these narrative scenes, most of them can be related to some story in the Indian mythology or Indian Puranas. So for example, here you see the man on a tree, and he's waiting for the tiger to go away. That is a story from essentially Shiva Purana, where our hunter waits out the tiger, and he throws the little leaves throughout the night to stay awake. And that is your festival of Shivratri eventually starts from that. And on the right is Krishna, who is uprooting two trees, which essentially were two demons who had been trapped, and once he uprooted them, he frees them. The bottom right is a seal that is made of silver. So you see, there were steatite seals for the most part, and eventually they discovered they could make it from silver. So what happens with steatite seal is once it gets obsolete, there's nothing you can do with it. You just have to break it and throw it or just discard it. But with silver or metal seals, you can just melt it and make another one. So you will stop seeing these seals in the archaeological record the moment they switch to metal. Okay. So what is the writing? What's the content of writing? So on the left, what you see is the writing from Balakot, which is um, on the coast of the Arabian Sea in Sindh, in actually Balochistan. And these are some of the earlier symbols. And many of the symbols are just starting out. They are in great detail. They're very pictorial. But you also see some that have already abstracted. So for example, if you see on the second row, the third symbol is like an arrow. It's detailed, but if you see it on the last row, the second symbol there is an arrow that is abstracted. So you see the abstraction already started in 4000 BC. Now, if you fast forward to about 2600 BC to 2450 BC, which is about 150 years, all the seals found in those 150 years have only these symbols, which you see in the right. So that means they could have a writing system and commerce and a mature civilization with only these symbols. This suggests that the signery of the script is pretty small. And later they added innovations, or they added shortcuts or variants and so on. So the question that many have raised, or you may have thought of, is it a language? Is it just symbols? Is it denoting some kind of family gods? Is it what is it denoting? Is it actually writing or not? So you have family crests or sigils in many places, and they look something like what is in the center. And they also have certain kind of certain stylistic uniformity, right? So they either they're vertical or they're in this particular direction, or when they mix them up, they mix it up in certain fashion and so on. Or could they be like these totem poles where you have some kind of structure? You have the winged thing on top, and you have the some other animal on the bottom. Is that kind of is it something like that? Is the Indus script something like that? That's the question. So we know the Indus script is language because of something called entropy. So entropy is essentially a term that means the amount of information that is held that is gained when you make a choice or make a decision or make a deduction about the value of a symbol. And entropy, one of the key things about entropy is that the number of states is finite. And the transition from one to the other. So if you want me to show this again, you see on the leftmost symbol there, which is like a square within a square. After that, you get these two numeric strokes, like these two small strokes. This is very common in Indus scripts. These are the first two signs. So if I see the first sign, I know within a certain probability that the second sign is going to be this particular sign. Okay. So that kind of predetermined probability of transition is necessary for something to have entropy. And this entropy is measurable. And what this means is that if you put all the letters randomly in English or any script, whether it's Devanagari or Chinese or Japanese, if you mix them up randomly, they don't make any sense. They're not legal words. They're not functional. So that is when you can calculate entropy. But in a style guideline, as in this, the family crests or these things, there is really nothing that's illegal, and there's nothing like I could create a completely new animal that doesn't even exist. I could create a a dragon or black swan or anything, and it would still be 100% legal. And when you see one of them, you cannot predict what's going to be the next one. And if someone does something that is completely against all the style guidelines, it will still function. So you can still go to war with it. You can create a flag. Your soldiers will know it's yours. The other opposite soldiers will know it's not theirs. All of that will work. Okay, so there all transitions are valid and the entropy is infinite because all arrangements are functional. Okay, so that is how we know that this is a language. And this was also done by this analysis was also done by Bharath Rao. Now there is another competing hypothesis that it's not language, but it's some kind of tax stamp license, something that is related to trade, where there is information regarding the what a person can do, but not actual words that you can read. And this is kind of unlikely because the number of seals is actually very short for such a long-lived civilization. There's about 4,500 seals, and in 1,000 sites or 1,000 years, it means every 1,000 years there's been 4 of these issued, which would be completely impractical for any kind of commerce-related usage, right? Now, Indus Valley is not completely sampled. It's not, only like 30% of Mohenjo-daro is excavated. But even if you make it 100x or even 1,000x, it is improbable that this kind of artifacts has anything to do with commerce. And the arrangement of the numeric signs, they don't make any sense. You can't read them as numeric values. Okay, and it can be trivially shown. I won't go into it right now because that's a little more involved. So, but how do we know that it is a language? We know it is a language because the signs repeat more than they should for such a large signary. So what does that mean? So there's something called a birthday collision problem. So if you have so many people in your class, what is the chance that 2 people have the same birthday? It comes to around 23. If there are 23 people, there is a good chance at least two people have the same birthday. Like it's about 50%. The probability crosses 50%. Of course, there's chances you may not have, but the probability becomes greater than 50% at 23. So if you apply the same to Indus symbols, if we take 417 as Yajnadevan's number as the total number of symbols, that number is around 25. So anything under 25 signs and inscription, you should not see a repetition. But we do see them, and we see them a lot, and we see them on even very short seals. What this tells you is that these represent not just language, but they represent language in a non-logographic form. So they are either alphabetic, syllabic, abugida, abjad. Okay. So once we know that it is indeed a script, so the question is, what is the direction of the script? And early research and continuing research shows that the direction of the script is from right to left. And it's everything from mathematical to the observation that inscriptions that have the same text in both single and double row, they can only be read if it's in the same way if it's from right to left. And also the crowding of the signs as you go to the end, all of these. This is one of the things that there is almost total consensus on, is that the direction is right to left. So in addition, what I observed was that there are inscriptions that are essentially repetitions of the same sign. So if it is repetitions, then it cannot really be alphabetic, because alphabetic implies that there is a vowel sign. So it has to be abjad or abugida, where you can have in abjad you don't need to notate any vowels, but in abugida there's a default vowel that you can override And if you're not overriding it, then you can just read it as a. So now that you know what kind of script it is, the question is what kind of language is it? What a friend of mine, Steve Bonta, showed that the inscriptions follow, they show a resemblance of multi-stem compounding. And I was able to extend that to rule out all agglutinative languages. Now, what's an agglutinative language? An agglutinative language has regular affixes. It has affix for one concept, and they can be combined. So, for example, I'm going to give an example in South Indian language, Kannada. In Kannada, ava means him. If you want to make it feminine, you add lu. So, avalu is female. If you say avaru, it means plural, them. Now, if you want to add a locative affix, you would say avaru alli, avaralli. The thing about this is that that sequence of affixes is in a predefined order. You cannot mix them up. It will not make sense. Avaralli is a legal word. Avallira is not a legal word. People wouldn't understand if you speak. So the Indus script shows signs where these, what would be affixes are interchanged. So in this example, on the left, you see the 4 symbols that occur all by themselves in some seals. And on the right, you see in H246, you see one of the symbols is followed by 2 or 3 symbols. And you see those, if those are affixes, then they cannot exist on their own, like, li and ra, these are not words. So, and you see that they interchange, like in H894 and 298, you see that they have changed their position. So this shows you that they are not affixes, but they are independently existing words. So this example, I think, is similar to Steve Bonta's, which is that there's a long word, H278, there's a long phrase, and there are the constituents of those phrases, they also appear as different seals. They appear as different inscriptions. So all of these they end in a jar sign. And when they're smushed together, the jar sign is removed. So the implication is that the jar sign is a affix, like a declension affix. What this means is, like, for example, in English, if you say ox and oxen is the plural, the en is the affix, there is a plural, affix. And the whole set seems to be there's an affix for each one, and when you smush them together, you remove the affix and you attach one at the end. So this is called a multi-stem compound, right? So in Indian languages, you would say, for example, Sri Ramachandra. Now, Sri Ramachandra, there are 3 different words that you have smushed together and made one word. This is very normal in Sanskrit, especially classical Sanskrit. You do have them in Vedic Sanskrit, but less. And you don't have them in Dravidian. In Dravidian, compounds are only 2 words. It's very rare to find anything more than 2. Okay, it's just the grammar of the language itself is only allows 2. So now that you know that it's not agglutinative, what you've done is you eliminated a huge number of languages, because most of the world languages are agglutinative. Japanese, Sumerian, Elamite, all Dravidian languages, most of the world languages are, they are agglutinative. The non-agglutinative languages, the big families in the area, are essentially Indo-European, which is the Sanskrit and related languages, and the Semitic languages like Egyptian and so on. So if you look at if you want to guess the language, and if you look at some of the inscriptions, you see these repeated symbols, and you can read them as potentially. So these can be easily read in Sanskrit. So the first one would be something like Baba, which is a conjugation of bhu. And the second is jaja, which is essentially a agentive form of judge, which means to fight. So jaja is the one who fights, okay, which means soldier. So once you decided on the language, so you've gone through a lot of steps. You have understood it's a language, understood its syllabic or abugida or abjad. You have figured out it's not agglutinative. It is language that's close, something like Sanskrit. Now, how do you go ahead and decipher it? Is it even possible to decipher? So the scripts have been deciphered using something called cryptanalysis from a long time. Okay, so this particular cipher, this is a very specific cipher that was used by Mary Queen of Scots. Mary Queen of Scots during the reign of Elizabeth in the 1500s. So in those days, they used to create this special cipher where they would just assign values to letters, and they would also have some nulls, like symbols that you just don't read. They just don't exist. And for special long words which you don't want people to which betray patterns, like for example here January, February, October, so that's a specific pattern. They use special shortcuts for those. So as you can see, it has many symbols per letter, and it's a fairly sophisticated cipher for that age. But even this was deciphered in the 1500s. And so you don't really need computers to do any of this. If you have enough samples, if you have enough letters, then you can decipher pretty much any cipher. Now, how did I model this problem? So, many people have tried to decipher the Indus script, and I say that my greatest contribution is modeling the problem correctly. And I modeled it on what I am familiar with, which is a cryptogram. So a cryptogram used to be, people had something called newspapers. There used to be this big piece of paper that would have all the day's news. And on one page, there would be called the puzzle page, you would have things like this crossword, a bunch of other things. One of the things you had was what's called a cryptogram. So you see it on the right here. Essentially, the alphabet has been scrambled. So you see in the Mary Queen of Scots, they created new symbols, but in newspapers, they don't create new symbols every time. So they just rearrange the alphabet and just say, for example, here say M equal to I, which means if there is M, that's the answer, the value of that is actually I. So for example, MT could be in or it, right? And you could try guessing the others and keep solving and see what makes sense. So this is an example of a cryptogram that I took from a website that I solved on that website. And the reason I picked it up was that it illustrates some of the key concepts of information theory in a practical way. So the black is the puzzle, the blue is the solution, as you may have guessed. And when you see this, one of the ways to solve it is to find words that have a peculiar pattern, repeating pattern. Because if there is a word with only, if there's no repeating symbols, you have a lot of candidates. But if you have repeating symbols, especially in a long word, then there are very few matches. You can use that as a guess. So in this, we will guess millennium as the word. So the moment I guessed millennium, you can see that the word is almost already filled in. It has only 2 letters left. And, I could guess those and it would fill in more. Now, what happens if I want to force, millennium to be something else? It will break the other letters. So when you need consistency, you cannot force a word to be what you want because something else will break somewhere else. That's essentially the key message here. Because the adjacencies of the different words are distributed in such a way that they are essentially random. Okay. So this is an example of how to bootstrap your decipherment. So obviously this is English talk, so I'm going to give English examples. So there are some patterns that have only one occurrence in the dictionary. So a short word is eel. There is no other word where the first and second letters are the same, and the third letter is something else. So in the pattern, we write as 112. So 112, you find only eel. The other pattern is 121, 232, where 1212 repeats and there's a new letter, and then at the end, there's again the second letter. So that matches only one word, papaya. And millennium you saw matches this particular pattern. And if you have a word like eel, you got two letters. You have solved the value of two letters. If you got papaya, if you have that pattern, you solved three letters, right? With millennium, you solved a lot more. Okay, you solved actually 6 letters. So what if you don't have these specific patterns? You can still do it with words that are not in patterns. You just have to use more words. So here in the bottom, I have this example with A, S, and P forming 4 words, and uniquely they solve for the values A, S, and P. And once you have a set of letters, whether it's 1 or 2 or 3 or 6, it is easy to extend it to other inscriptions to get more letters. So this is essentially where you can, mathematically, this is basically the whole methodology. Okay. So you have an initial set which was null, and after eel, that initial set is now EL. And then you have 2 inscriptions which only contain the known letters, and you have in between them you have an additional symbol that is unknown. So here you have additional symbol between L and E, and one before L and L. So if you look up on the dictionary, the words that match L unknown E are these guys: li, lie, and lie. And the words that match unknown LL is all and ill. From those 2 sets, it is very clear that the only letter that would satisfy both the unknown inscription, both the unknown words, is I. So the unknown symbol is I. The words are lie and ill. So you did that just by doing an intersection. So even extracting those things, it's an intersection. Okay, so it's essentially a set intersection over and over and over until you get only one. So once you get the values, how do you know that you didn't fumble somewhere in the middle? Maybe at one particular step you got a false positive or something like that. That is determined by something called crossing the unicity distance. Now, what is the unicity distance? The unicity distance is a particular point beyond which, if you read, it is mathematically improbable that you have any wrong values, right? So if we model the Indus symbols as a homophonic cipher, which means it's essentially something similar to Queen Mary Queen of Scots, which is even simpler than that. You just have multiple symbols that map to one value. It's called a homophonic cipher. If you cross 500, you are comfortably, you have crossed the unicity distance. There's another kind of cipher called the polyalphabetic cipher, where it's a many-to-many mapping. And in that, if you cross 3000, you have crossed that unicity distance. So we have read more than double of any of these. So we read approximately half the corpus meaningfully and in consistent themes. So we are very confident that we have crossed the unicity distance, and mathematically it's improbable that there's any other solution to the Indus cipher. So this is just from the paper, from the derivation section, how the first 1 or 2 were deciphered. So you saw the jar sign is like an affix. It's like a declension affix. And we have inscriptions where there are 3 of these, right? And of course, in many inscriptions, they're at the end. So the only word that you can do from any of the affixes is ananan. Okay, so ananan is a word. I've written ananam here, which is also essentially the same. So ananan is a word that is you can easily derive it's a legal word. And because that fits, we figured out that the first symbol is un. And from that, we figured out the stick symbol is a, because you have the only legal words you can form are these, and so on. We go and we and we go in a sequence and we get all these values for all these different um, symbols. And then what we did was we said, okay, what object could look like this, look like the symbol that starts with this letter? Remember, this is the opposite of what other people do, which is they look at something and say, what does this look like? And try to give it the value. That is prone to a lot of mistakes because you can imagine anything as anything. Here it's different. We are reconstructing the names. If we are wrong here, it's not going to impact the values of the decipherment. So we try to guess and say, hey, what could this be? And generally we find only one that matches it. Sometimes we find two, like fish M could be Matsya, Meena, and so on. But generally there's only one that matches this. And then when we arrange them by the the Sanskrit sequence of letters, we find something very interesting. The names are very, very close, right? They are as if, you see, some of them are homonyms, like Kritam for dice and axe, they're essentially the same word. And others like Tandula to Tadula is just like a nasalization thing. So there's a hypothesis that since there were people of many dialects, when someone communicates the symbol, they hear it slightly differently, and they draw an object that sounds very similar, but looks different. And that is why you have so many signs. And you can see, when you look at the symbols, when you see the objects in real life, it's very obvious what what they're creating. For example, the shakara, which is a squirrel, you can see it looks exactly like that. And the verti, which is the wick, which is wick, essentially, it looks exactly like that. So it is very once you see the actual object and the symbol, you're never going to forget what it stands for. Another effect of this decipherment is that we noticed. I noticed a few first, and then I said, let's put it all together. Let's see what Indus symbol looks closest to its Brahmi equivalent. And I came up with this, and I was shocked. This is one of the shocks I had, was that sometimes it's impossible to tell which is Brahmi, which is Indus. It's essentially the same. So the conjecture here is that Brahmi is essentially standardized Indus with very little variations. So now, what are the contents of this of the seals and all these materials? So this is the first seal that I read many seals, but this is the first time, and I couldn't really understand what they were talking about. So one day on Shivaratri, or the day before the Shivaratri, I was just reading this, and Sri Rudram was playing, and I realized, man, this is essentially the line from Sri Rudram. Yat Isha Shivatama, and Yes Tamro Arunauta Bhabru Sumangala. So essentially, it's just Shiva is someone who's red. Essentially, it's the rising sun, and you pray to Shiva to calm his arrows and give his bounties. So so I saw this, and I was like, wow, this. Let's try with all the other long inscriptions, and I was able to find similar ideas in all the long inscriptions. And eventually I found that this tradition continued into Gupta era, and Gupta seals also have this compact, sutra form of, Vedic mantras. Now, how do you read the text? Essentially, it's Abugida, and there's a default vowel is A, unless overridden by the next sign. So eventually, Brahmi invented diacritics, where the vowel is attached on top of the sign. But the older Brahmi, you can see here, they overrode, at least the long vowel, they overrode by putting it next to the letter. So Indus essentially is the same, and even in Indus you can see in some places they put the vowel on top also. So that is why I call it Proto-Abugida, because it's very similar to Tamil Brahmi. Now, what are some of the things that we can read? So this is Dolavira signboard. Many people ask me what is this, and it reads Raka Vararaka Araras, which means diamond gem entrance or gem of chosen gems entrance. So yeah, it's one thing to read, it's another thing to find grammatical consistency. And what is grammatical consistency? So people who are only familiar with English may not know this, but if you know some other European languages or Indian languages, you know that there is the plurals are different for different genders, different for different numbers, and so on. So here this is an example of Makham in singular and Makhani in plural, and this works because Makha, the word Makha, is neuter. If it was feminine, it wouldn't be Makhani, it would be Makaha. So you see that grammatically the plurals are consistent. And here you see that the declensions are also grammatically correct. So this is Pana. Pana is a masculine word. And when you have to say, Pana in instrumental, like using Pana, it would be Panaihi. And you see that they've maintained the correct form of the declension. One more is the adjective noun agreement. So adjectives and nouns have to be declined in the same case. So if it's accusative, it has to be an accusative. So the first example is both are an accusative. The second is when they're in vocative, both have to be vocative. Otherwise, it's grammatically incorrect. So you see that this also complies. As one more subject-verb agreement, this is for conjugation. So when something is in the third person, when the verb is in third person, the subject has to be in first person. When the verb is in second person, like when it's in imperative, the subject has to be in vocative. And when it's in first person, then the subject has to be in first person. So you see these, it complies with the subject-verb agreement of grammar. So these are examples of what's called kradanta. Kradanta means a verb, noun created from a verb by attaching a specific affix. So you see that the proper kradantas are applied to create the nouns in the right way. So these are, lakara means it's just different kinds of conjugation. So it's not only one kind of conjugation. You see different kinds. So lit is like what's called the perfect tense. That's something that's happened in the past and completed in the past. And lut is present and so on. So these are they are all complying with the they are all demonstrating the various lakaras. In addition to the lakaras which continued into later Sanskrit or classical Sanskrit, you also have a couple of Vedic forms. So one is called a late lakara. Late lakara is what is called subjunctive. And subjunctive went out of use after Vedic Sanskrit and was replaced by operative and imperative and so on. So here, for example, you see the late lakara forms, and you also find something called the Vedic injunctive. And this particular word is attested in these different places, the sadat. We also have a list of rare Rigvedic words. What does rare Rigvedic word means? It means that it's only attested in Rigveda. It's not even attested in later Vedas. And these are some of them, Anarva, and many of these are names of Indra or Rudra, right? So, for example, Dhanvachara is a very it's a very unlikely name that you would get if there was you cannot force these values even if you wanted to. So in addition to the names, we have names from Sanskrit literature we already know about. So Aina, where a people is the name of a people. It's mentioned in Mahabharata, but they've existed for a while before that. Vamra and Tanva are Rigvedic poets. Now, Tanva possibly could be, could be anybody. It's not a very unlikely name, but Vamra is a very unlikely name because Vamra means ant. And generally, if you remember names from Indian literature, like a name like Drona means a pot. The reason they are named like that is because there's a history. There's a reason they gave those names. Those are not names you're going to find ever again. People are not going to name you that. So Vamra, it's possible that it is the actual Vamra, or at least it's the family name of the Vamra clan. And of course, you have Madhu, Yama, Rira, which is also Shiva, Dara, and all this. So there's a lot of Shiva names. Shiva names are like in literally dozens, pretty much. But these are known names. In addition, we have new names that we actually, at least I haven't found in, I haven't found in the existing Indian literature. So one is, Anama Ahan, which is face striker, which is Indra from, he struck the face of Rata. Ashruda for Rudra, which means he gives tears. Ahatman, which is soul of the day for Surya, and so on. So you have a lot of these names which are obviously, when you read it, you obviously know who they're talking about. So that is the end of the presentation, and we can, we can have some question answers.
Okay. I have a few questions here. I think one of the first one was, can you briefly describe what is Abugeda and Abjad? What is that? How in a pretty easy
Okay.
form, I guess.
Let me actually just show one thing for you guys. So do you see this web page here with the Indus corpus?
Yes.
So this website, indusscript.net, is where we have published all the inscriptions. We are actively updating it, and you can look at what it looks like. What's the translation? This is our translation. Maybe you guys may come up with something better. And the cool thing is now, just today, we added, photographs of the actual seals where it's available. Many of them are not available. For example, this is a much later seal, 1657, so we don't have this yet. Okay, but all the old seals, we have them. So you can look at what the seal looks like, and you can compare it to, have you transcribed it correctly, and then you have the values. So some values are here. If you want a quick reference, you can.
So Bharath, are you able to just do a quick demo of if somebody wants to go to this website and try to find out how to write their name in Indus script? Can you just
I'm going
show
there.
us a quick example?
I'm doing that. I'm just going through all the things in the site. So this, this particular, you can explore it. Like, you have a canonical which shows it in, simplified format, and so on. So you also have list of all the signs here, and if you click one, you see the various forms. So if you want to explore what are my options to write a particular sign, you see, for this sign, you have a lot of options. You have keyboard, which is pretty interesting. So you can, for example, write your own name. So I'm just going to write my name in Devanagari, right? So if you don't have Devanagari keyboard, you can go to Google Translate and just type it in English. It will, it will type it in Devanagari for you. But if you have Devanagari keyboard, you can just type, for example, I can type. And it will render my name like that. Okay. So this is how my name is written. And this is one of the ways. Of course, I have different options for word and so on. But this, especially if you have a long text, this makes it very easy for you to write it. Now, if you want to compare it with Brahmi, we saw that Brahmi and this is similar. You can do that, and it will show you a slightly different set of letters, and you can see how almost exactly the same they are. See that? So I invite you to try this. If you don't have Devanagari, you have something called SLP1. SLP1 is you essentially write a capital S for Shah. Let me change. Like Shah is this. You can see the Devanagari thing, right? Shakar, that looks like that. And all the aspirated are capital, the unaspirated are small letters, the long vowels are capital, short vowels are short, and so on. You can look it up what SLP is. It's pretty easy once you understand it. There's also IAST, which if it's a general audience, you probably don't know what it is, but it's the things with dots, to differentiate the na and all that. So this is generally this will actually is a very fast way to learn Indus script. You just type whatever you want, it shows up below. So you type anything you want, it will show up below, so you'll be able to read it. Okay. The Indus script is more complicated than this. It's just we have just shown you one way of writing a particular word. There are other ways of writing it as well. So I'm going to go back to the questions, and later if you have more questions about this, we can discuss that. So the question is, what is Abugida and what's Abjad?
Yes.
Abugida basically is very straightforward. Abugida is like Devanagari is Abugida, for example. So even Brahmi is Abugida. In Abugida, there is a default A vowel. So think about it like this. In an alphabet, the default vowel is no vowel. You have to write every vowel. Now in Sanskrit, what happens is, or Indian languages, A is the most common vowel. So why do you need a symbol for it? So default, instead of making it no vowel, you can make A as the default vowel. That's basically what it is. So in an abjad, what happens is, so let's say instead of writing every time, if I write, you can still kind of read it, okay? So it's, did I give you the book? Okay. So if your language has only short vowels, abjad is a very, is a viable script. So Arabic, Hebrew, they are all abjads. Now, of course, they have, they have dots and little dashes and all of that to denote the vowels. So it's no longer 100% abjad. But the original Semitic scripts were abjad because they had only short vowels, right? And Abugida is essentially you have a default vowel unless you override it. So for example, in Devanagari, if I write, let's say I write Devanagari. If I write Devanagari here, you see diacritics for the, you see a line after na, you see a little loop after e, after ra. These are diacritics that denote it is not a vowel. But for va and ga, let me highlight this. So this is ga and this is va. There's no diacritics. There's no diacritics because a is the most common vowel, so you don't need to denote it. Okay. So that's Devanagari, that's Abugida, that's Abjad. And of course, the syllabic where there is a, there's a assumed vowel or assigned vowel for every symbol. So these are the three kind of, broadly, these are the three kind of non-logographic scripts. Any other question?
Okay. Yeah, we have a few more. Bhavanaji is asking, what myth or wrong narrative about Hindu or Sanatana did we bust by this work? by deciphering the script, what is the wrong narrative that we are trying to debunk, or
I think the most important narrative was that, excuse me, the most important narrative that was going on for a while was there was something called a dark age, where there's nothing is known. And the Indus civilization, whatever great things they may have done, is declined or erased, and a new urbanization and a new civilization was started sometime just before 1000 BC, and Vedas were written in 1000 BC and so on, all of that stuff, and then essentially everything you had was brand new from that time onwards. And they also allege that all of these ideas came from outside, like 1200 BC. Somebody came and then they built all this stuff.
this actually helps debunk the whole Aryan invasion theory. That's what it
Right.
does.
So
Oh,
yeah. No, let me. Yeah. So it's- the hypothesis as of today is evolving, and there's genetic research and all this going on. And there are some surprising finds recently that Iranians do not have. So let me, for those who may not know, the hypothesis originally was that Indian languages came from India and went everywhere. And then during colonizations, it was pretty counterintuitive for the Europeans to think how can we come from there. We must have gone and done this there. And the reasoning in those days, if you look at it from that time, it looked like very common sense reason. They were going around in Americas, killing people, taking their land. They were doing that in South America. They're doing that in Australia, and they thought, yeah, this is what we do. This is what we must have done in India also. And because they didn't have any of the information that they had at that time, and they just made that assumption. And then when they started trying to locate where the people originally came from and what is the where they came and all of that, the Germans wanted that to be essentially in Austria, because that's this was a time of the Hitler and all that, and they wanted it to be in Hitler's backyard basically. So they suggested that the word for birch, and this particular plant only exists in that spot. But this just most of these kind of ideas are very illiterate. And there's birch in India. We write on birch barks. Our documents have been written on birch barks for millennia. So the whole idea of was the methodology was you take one word and then just pin it to the homeland of your choice. So people pinned it to everywhere. Everywhere their favorite spot was. Scandinavia was there, China was there, Arctic was there. I mean, I don't know any place that was not called the homeland. It's pretty bizarre. It's more like humanities in those days more like a narrative setting. It's not science. Even now you wouldn't call it science. And then I think in the 60s there was this person, Maria Gimbutas, who had like this radical feminist outlook. And the only reason I'm mentioning it is because her whole hypothesis was that Europeans were this gentle, sharing people who were doing all these great things, and people from the steppes came and they were very brutal. Essentially, she was saying Europe was feminist and the steppe people were like patriarchal, and they came and killed them and destroyed everything. And so that was her theory, her hypothesis. She was also archaeologist, but her hypothesis was essentially based on victimhood of European feminist cultures. Okay, so now all of this is completely her imagination. There's no proof that Europeans were Pacific, they were Pacific, or none of everything is made up. Everything is like her imagination. But that narrative kind of got traction. And I think like 20 years ago, there was some genetic study in India that showed, right, so they extrapolated it from, they started with Europe and they extrapolated it to other places where Indo-European languages are. One of the big ones is being Iran and India. And they kind of calculated it must have happened during 1500 BC, and they had to kind of fit the arbitrary assumed date of Rig Veda and all. So there's, they said, okay, then these languages came to India in 1500 BC. So this was their hypothesis, and it got discredited a couple of times. It got resurrected a couple of times. And I remember 20 years ago or so, I don't remember exactly when, but there was a genetic study done on Indians, which showed that Indians had mixed, that these two ancestral populations had mixed much before. Therefore, the Aryan invasion theory is discredited. This was like decades ago, and everybody said, okay, yeah, this is gone. And then recently, then this new genetics, because now the technology improved, they could find bodies, they could preserve it, and there's a lot more mathematical tools to do the analysis and all. And they found, they started saying that yes, Maria Gimbutas was right. The Indo-European started in Ukraine, right? And even more recently, there's another study that came up that said Iranians don't have any of that ancestry. So Iranians don't have from that time don't have steppe ancestry, and they speak Iranic. So now that is falsified. So this kind of stuff will keep going on and on and on. And the decipherment, what it does is it minimally pushes any outside ingress of language to before 4000 BC. Because 4000 BC we have the first writings. 3000 BC we have the first complete seal that we can read as Sanskrit. And there's some graffiti in the Ravi phase in 3500, 3700. And if you include that, it looks very, very uncertain that anything could have come before the Indus Valley civilization. And you saw the maps. The Indus sites were active. Let me bring that up. So you can see the Indus sites were active in Haryana till 700 BC. So Haryana is where all the Vedic stuff happened, right? That all the locations are there. The Sudas fighting, all of that is there. So how did people who came, if anyone came from outside, they would be just absorbed into the civilization. And there's this, you would see the bones changing. You would see the strontium, the ratio of the teeth changing. You would see pottery. It would be very disruptive if people came from outside. When there is an active site, into that site, you would see the disruption. It would be very, very obvious. So we don't have any of that. So that is one. The other is, and this is just, we are talking about just from my script. It's any story of people coming in have to be pushed out before 4000 BC because nothing agrees. And I also said in my other talks about the volume of the text, like 1 billion words of the Indian literature just doesn't fit into this timeline. It's just not possible to write that much, have linguistic change, and create, writing and have it enough network effect to create a writing. So I'll tell you what I mean. If in America, the urban setting, essentially the African American population, they have their own dialect, and they've had their own dialect for hundreds of years. But for that to have enough network effect, for enough people to recognize it, that you create art in that language, and that art gets enough popularity, that only happened like a few decades ago with rap music, right? Before that, in movies and all, you had a certain, they would speak in a certain way, but that is just a peripheral thing. But actual main art in that dialect, it takes hundreds of years. So now imagine the changes from Rigvedic to Yajurvedic, and imagine creating an entire Veda based on this, and having all these Ganapatis recite it in a certain way, to memorize it and create the schools and everything. How many years do you need from Rigveda to Yajurveda? You're going to need thousands of years, right? So it just, for many reasons, I am, it just doesn't make any common sense to put any kind of date after 4000 BC. That's much I can tell you for sure.
So Bharatji, I think we did not have the opportunity because we were trying to do this in an efficient time manner, but you never introduced yourself. I hope you're able to just share, 30 seconds of your intro, a minute of your intro, so that people know. And there seems to be a lot more questions that people have, but I think it's already 1.5 hours into the webinar, so we'll have to cut it short now, and we can maybe do a follow-up down the road to just do a Q&A and kind of put together a more summary for students, perhaps, which has been a suggestion that was made. So would you mind introducing yourself and telling people, your background and how you came up with this, if you can?
Yes, my name is Bharath Rao. I am a computer science and computer engineering as my background. I've been doing a little bit of cryptography. I worked for Motorola Labs. I've done some cryptography there, and but the things I've used are pretty basic, pretty straightforward, simple, that ordinary people have done for really hundreds of years. And I came across the Indus problem during COVID. I saw someone on Twitter tweeting about other decipherments, so I just started generally browsing it, and none of the decipherments made sense to me. So I thought, hey, why not try this? And that's how I started it. In the beginning, it was just a hobby. I was, just something to do to pass the time. And as I got some success and as I started reading stuff, it just pulled me in, and I said, yeah, this can be done. This can be cracked. So that's how I got into it.
So are you finding any type of pushback from academics, because there's a lot of work that has been done for entire careers that maybe has to be rethought through because of this finding, as long as
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And see, with all scripts, the acceptance is very, very slow. It's very slow. Champion's decipherment of Egyptian hieroglyphs was not accepted till after he died. Linear B took decades. So people are very, very hesitant because there is always shock, surprise, and the question is, there's incredulity. Like, how can this be? And there is nothing to do except soak them in and wait for them to marinate and get used to it. That's the only thing you can do. So recently, though, because we have mathematical metrics like unicity distance, we have a lot more, hopefully we will have a lot more easier time to get acceptance faster. So, I mean, as far as the academic pushback, see, the pushback will always be there, especially this is a very hot button issue. Like you said, it's, they have like 100 years of, work that they have built, which based on assumptions that this simply cancels the assumption. So they have to redo all of that again, and they have to, so of course there's going to be a lot of opposition. But the great thing that I've been able to do is not solve the Indus script, but present it in a way that a high school or at least a college educated person can easily understand, because the math I've used is not complex. The method I've used is pre-existing. Everything is simple enough that ordinary people will understand. Now, if you go to the site and start writing your name and you see it works, and it's just a matter of time before it becomes obvious.
So we have a couple of academics in the audience. Actually, I saw Dr. Eric Larson from Florida International University, and also Dr. Restifo from Florida International University in the audience. I don't know if they have anything from an academic perspective to say or talk or mention anything. That would be great. Dr. Larson, Dr. Restifo, if you have anything, if you're still on, would love to hear if you have any feedback. We may have to unmute them. Let me see if I can.
Professor Restifo, if you're there, I'll let you go first.
Well, no, Dr. Larson, you should go and then I'll follow you. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for a fascinating presentation. I've been interested in this problem for a number of years, and I've been waiting expectantly for someone to come up with a good solution to it. I really do appreciate the clarity of your explanation, and a lot of it makes sense to me. I think it is interesting that you talk about the parallels with linear A and with linear B. I think you mentioned maybe linear A, but I know you mentioned linear B. Yeah, because one of the things, of course, is the question of why change the script. And I don't know, but we do know with linear B, let's say, that has been deciphered to most people's satisfaction overall, right? So some questions. Yeah, it's an interesting issue of why change the script. And I don't know if you have any comments on that.
Right. So I don't know what you mean by change the script. Essentially, the script was standardized into Brahmi. The Brahmi glyphs are all from the Indus script glyphs. There's only some rotation and some minor changes. And if you saw the website, you can write the Indus script as Brahmi also. So if I write, for example, wait, how do I go to the presentation here? Right. So I'm kind of having trouble finding the screen, but okay, here it is. Screen. Resume share. Okay. Okay. Do you see the website?
Yes.
So you could write anything you want, and if I say use Brahmi like glyphs at the bottom here, you should see that they are very identical. So the upper is Indus script, the lower is Brahmi. So Brahmi eventually became Devanagari and all these in the modern scripts. But you see how similar they are. The is rotated, the man is rotated, but everything else is pretty much the same. So the script did not change; it got standardized. So Indus script has many glyphs, and what they did was when they started carving on rocks, they selected the simplest glyphs to make it easy to carve on rocks. So on seals, the more elaborate it is, the more prestigious it is. But when you start carving on rocks, you want efficiency and you want legibility from large distance. So that's basically the difference.
Yes. Okay. I guess I would say so. The situation in Greek, and for everybody who's there, I teach Greek at FIU, ancient Greek. Eventually, Greek adopted the Phoenician alphabet, and it became an alphabetic script, right? And so you could reduce the number of symbols. So I am a little bit curious. I don't know. There were a couple of points where I couldn't quite follow everything, but it seems like in the Indus Valley script, there's a lot of symbols.
Yeah.
And so how do you see that? It's not right. If it was an alphabetic script, it would be much fewer symbols.
Right. So anyway, I'm showing the slide where the correspondence between Brahmi and Indus. So in each box, the left one is Brahmi, the right one is Indus. So you see how similar they are, right? So the reason originally you had a lot of symbols in the Indus script is very simple. All scripts that were invented from scratch without the knowledge of other scripts tend to have a lot of symbols. And the reason for that is pretty straightforward. In the days, so all human activity and all human communication is a network effect. And what happens is people copy each other and eventually a particular variant stabilizes. And until it stabilizes, you're going to have a lot of variants. So in Egyptian hieroglyphs, there are a lot of symbols for the same thing, same sound. In Sumerian, there are more than 10 sounds which have more than 10 symbols each, right? And you can write, for example, Lugal, which means king, can be written in different ways. It can be written in two cuneiform sequences, you can be written as a logogram and so on. So same with Mayan, you have 10 symbols for, or 8 or 10 symbols for U and so on, because they were all invented from scratch without the knowledge of other writing systems. So when you, with the hindsight of 4,000 or 6,000 years, you would think, why the hell they will create so many symbols? But when you invent writing for the very first time, you don't even know what it is. And even if you create some symbols, having everybody use the same small set of symbols is a network effect. It's not your intelligence, it's not your organization, none of that. So especially here, when I kind of showed the how close the symbol names are, right? So for example, S here, Shakara, Shukra, Shikara, Shika, these are all very, very close. So when you have a place like the Indus Valley, where you have people coming from various parts of the, different towns, who has different dialects. And remember, in the older days, there were more dialects because the intercity or communication was less. So when you have the dialect, and if I am telling you, hey, to write for the sound S, use shakara, and you hear it as shukra, because your ears hear it differently, because you are from a different dialect, you would write a different symbol. And eventually it standardizes. And, so that is one. The other is you do use multiple symbols for the same sound, even today in English. For example, when you write cork, you use C and K for the same sound, and so on. So this kind of ambiguity exists, all the time. And what happens is, once you have the network effect, you have documents and all of that, it's very hard to undo that network effect until there's a reset. So in Indus Valley, the reset was its decline, it was collapse. And then when the Mauryan Empire took over, they had that gap to standardize on a smaller set and create essentially this from a subset of the Indus glyphs.
Very nice.
Dr. Restivo, did you have any questions?
She may be muted.
Yeah, maybe she's muted. Dr. Restivo, are you able to talk?
Yes, thank you for unmuting. I couldn't unmute myself. No, thank you so much for the presentation. Really fascinating. And I mean, there is so much like technical stuff. I couldn't follow all of that, I have to be honest. But it's very impressive, and you can just see that you have a system. I think once you have a system, once you figure out how to approach that, that's extremely helpful, and then you can really like check yourself and make sure that you're kind of keeping it right. But I wanted to, I mean, one thing that I think Professor Larson mentioned, right? One of the things that why it was so hard to decipher is because so many symbols appear just like once, right? Or maybe just a couple of times. But
Right.
you are seeing them, I see that as variations, right? Of the same like akshara, right? Of the same syllable.
Right. So let me
Mhm.
do something here. So in any pictorial or
Also, Bharath, please speak up a little bit. Your voice is coming in a little low.
oh, okay. Right. So when you have small variations in symbols, so when something is pictorial, and you and I agree, for example, let's say you and I
Yeah, some
agree.
of the things are pictorial and others are like syllabic, right?
No, well, they're all syllabic. It's just um, the things they represent are they look like they are just glyphs. So, for example, this is a stick. A stick is just a line. This what looks like a is essentially a plowshare. So and there are pictures of exactly the flowchart that looks like that. So when you have many inscriptions that are very, very similar, except their characters vary just very slightly, so the difference between this is very slightly. The probability of a large number of those having different values drops precipitously.
Right. Makes sense.
And if you and I agree, for example, that we're going to denote the letter D with a dog, okay? And if I draw a dog that is sleeping and you draw a dog that is jumping and whatever, right? Big dog, small dog, we would still be able to read it because our value of the sign is what it represents. It's a dog. So it doesn't actually matter what the dog is doing. So in most of the Indus, the so-called different signs are essentially variations. And I discovered those variations as part of the decipherment. So what would happen is I would mathematically see if the signs that are kind of similar give the same value, like can I reduce them to one value, or whether it generates a null set. So if when they have different values, if I have like ka and ya, if I intersect them, I'm going to get a null value. Only if they're all ka, I'll get the same value. The other thing is what I noticed is when you have something like this, say I have I have the different kind of these x's. X is ka, and I have the different ones. I have the one with the little gap here, the doubled one, the simple x. They all could be independently proven to have the same value ka. Similarly, the various sha, they all, the signs that are similar, many of them could be, there is enough attestations for me to independently prove that they are all the same. So let me get this, for example. Let's sort by length. So for example, this and this, they could all be resolved to the same value. So and this, for example, and you will see many inscriptions when you browse through them, it will look obvious because they can all be read as the same. So not only, so the signs were mathematically determined, they were not visually determined. So visually they are only determined to the extent that there's a chance they are similar. So for example, I wouldn't do this and this as the same. I wouldn't. They look too different. But if they are close enough, like something that's like a cup, like a jar, I have tried, and if many of them are the same, many of them are not the same. So that reducing of the set has been done mathematically. It's not been done like arbitrarily or by visual examination.
Right. No, thank you. That makes a lot of sense because I think that was one of the obstacles, right, to deciphering the script. At least
I think I think the biggest obstacle was that there's been no real mathematical decipherment. There's been also the idea that it must be Tamil, and when you apply a wrong language, you could do it for decades. It's not going to lead you anywhere. And there was also the question of is this abjad? Is it like logographic? I mean logographic stuff just will not work. If you read my paper, you'll see Yajnadevam, who is a very esteemed epigrapher. The way he did was he found one sign that looks like the sign for city in Egyptian hieroglyphs. He called it city. And if that occurred with like two strokes, I can show that actually. Like for example, this occurred with two strokes. So alone it was city, but with this he called it rural. And something else he called chicken. Now what happens is you'll find some inscription where they all come together, and one of them was you would read it as ruler chicken jar bearer. So it starts becoming meaningless, and every permutation you have to give it more and more meanings, and that essentially will lead you to the sum of all permutations of everything, which is 417 factorial into e, the constant, which is nearly infinity. It's a very large number. So that you could it doesn't make sense. So even assigning the word of your choice just wouldn't work, right? And we are, we are at 48%. We are almost 50%. We have read the inscriptions. We have read it from the longest to the shortest. We are at size, length 5. So the most difficult part is over. And there's a lot of these small inscriptions that, we have to find time to finish it up. But yeah, the main reason was the idea that it's logographic, the idea that it's Tamil, the idea that, that this must be some kind of, because essentially everyone thought that, it's from 3000 BC, it must be like Sumerian or, one of those things. And it's just that they did not, if they had analyzed the pattern of repetitions, it would be pretty obvious that it's, I think that's the other thing. I think I guess the kind of script, in addition to determining the language, methodically.
So I think thank you, Dr. Restifo. It's already coming on almost 2 hours. I'm very, very surprised, actually, pleasantly, that so many people still stayed on. Almost 40 people still on the call, which clearly shows that there's a significant amount of interest in this. And I think the next step of this has to be to synthesize this into a digestible format for a layperson to understand, and young students to understand, and maybe older folks to understand as well, without a lot of the technical details, or minimize it as much as possible. But this was great. So Kumar, Gaurav, do you want to just say a few words about Dharmansh and close it out, and thank Bharath Rao and all of you for staying? Kumar bhai?
Yes, thank you very much, Bharath Rao ji. And it was, I was one of those people who didn't understand any of this to begin with. So it was very helpful, and my first introduction to this very, very educational session. And I am surprised at 2 hours. I was initially worried at 1 hour mark, knowing that people, really don't have that much of patience these days. So, but I'm thrilled to still see that there are, good number of people still hanging in here, and a lot of questions that we couldn't answer because of time. So thank you very much. And thank you everyone for a great participation in the discussion and good feedback. So Dharmansh, like Shashi Bhai mentioned in the beginning, and I just wanted to repeat that Dharmansh is, you know, what is that, 5013C organizations based in the United States, and we support any work which is good for humanity. Um, um, any work that can bring or add value to civilization, Hindu civilization, Sanatana Dharma civilization, and bust the myths that have been going around. We will do a lot of educational projects as well. I assume that there are a lot of people who are new, first time hearing the name Dharmansh as well. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. If you have an email and you would like to send us an email in your feedback, questions, concerns, anything, our email address is team@dharmansh.org. Very simple, team@dharmansh.org. And we would be very happy to get back to you and get in touch with you. I have personally received some questions from some of our participants, and I will be reaching out to you later. And with that, I want to thank everybody, and thank you for staying. Have a great night, and see you later.